Hello, everyone, and we're back again. I'm Elder James T. Moss Sr., and we're here with familiar pitfalls, falling into familiar pits. Okay, and hey, we're up to lesson 3 right now, and we're cooking with gas. We're moving with steam here. All right, so I want you guys to understand this. All right, I hope that you guys have been with me from the first videos we go through this because each video builds on the last one. Okay, and there's a process. So if you didn't get a chance, go back and check out the first two, and then roll on with this. Uh, I'm not. I'm the author of the book that is inspired by has inspired these videos. Okay, but I'm not teaching the whole book. Okay, and here's the book. Familiar pitfalls, falling into familiar pits. Okay. Now, when you get it, you won't have this gray stripe here saying not for resale because that's just my personal copy, for proofing. Okay. But I want to show it to you. You can get it on Amazon. It's in hardback, it's in paperback, it's on ebook format for Kindle. Just search Familiar Pitfalls title or my name, Elder James T. Moss Sr. Okay. And get the book because it's really going to last you a lifetime and it's going to help you understand a lot of things about dealing with familiar pitfalls. Okay. And so pitfalls we can use interchangeably with the word sin or sins. Okay. So definitely tell your friends, tell your family. And for those of you who are into ebooks, I mean not ebooks, but audiobooks, you can find the audio book on 11 Labs. Okay. 11 Labs will you can be able you're able to get it there also. So uh, before, without further ado, we're just going to jump into today's lesson. This week's lesson is going to be lesson 3: Why familiar pits feel comfortable. All right. So remember now, we're talking about familiar sin. So that should already let you know that familiar sin feels comfortable. All right, but we're going to get into the whys. Okay, so in this one we do have primary scriptures, which is going to be Hebrews chapter 11, verses 24 through 26, Proverbs chapter 26, verse 11, and Galatians chapter 5, verse 1, for those of you who are keeping score at home. All right, so listen, let's go into this thing. So in lesson 1, we asked, what pit keeps calling me back? All right, we learned that before someone can avoid a pit, they must first identify the one that keeps calling them back. In lesson 2, we asked, what road keeps taking me there? Okay. And we learned that familiar pits usually have familiar roads and that no one falls back into a familiar pit without first traveling a familiar road. Now, in lesson 3, we're going to go a little bit deeper. And so now you see why I said, hey, follow the lessons because each one kind of piggybacks off the last one. So in lesson 3, we're going to go deeper here today and we're asking the question, why does the familiar pit sometimes feel comfortable? Huh? See, that question may sound strange at first, but because we usually think of pits as painful places, that's what makes it strange. Okay. But if we are honest, many people return to familiar patterns not because those patterns are healthy, but because those patterns are known. All right. And sometimes what is known can feel safer than what is right. All right. I had a coworker once upon a time when I lived in Philadelphia, and she was from Scotland, and she said they had this saying, "Better the devil you know than the one you don't." Yeah, I was like, wow. And it stuck with me because it's like, okay, so better the evil that you're familiar with than the one that you've got to become accustomed to. Hmm. Why didn't it just say, better the truth than the devil you know? But then again, that shows us how we have that pit mentality. Even when we're trying to be philosophical, we're still caught up in pit mentality. So today's big question is this, okay? Why do familiar pits feel comfortable even when they are destructive? All right. So this is where we must be honest. See, some people return to old habits because those habits bring temporary relief. Some people return to old sins because those sins offer temporary pleasure. Some people return to old attitudes because those attitudes feel justified. All right. Some people return to old relationships because loneliness feels worse than dysfunction. Ooh, 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 wait. All right. So some return to old fears because fear feels more familiar than faith. Fear over faith. How about that? And some return to old bitterness because bitterness feels like protection. See how all these things kind of counter what God represents and stands for? All right, I don't want to get too far ahead of myself here. But the pit is not always comfortable because it's good. Sometimes the pit is comfortable because it's familiar. Huh? And when familiarity disguises danger as comfort, a person can begin defending the very thing God is trying to deliver them from. Ooh, wait, you see, the comfort of the familiar is not the same as the peace of God. Uh, that is going to be our anchor statement for this lesson, as a matter of fact. The comfort of the familiar is not the same as the peace of God. See, familiarity can imitate comfort, it can imitate safety, it can imitate control, it can imitate relief. But not everything that feels familiar is healthy. Not everything that feels comfortable is safe. Not everything that gives temporary relief brings freedom. You see? So, what we're doing is we're examining why familiar pits feel comfortable, right? So, the reason this matters is because many people do not return to familiar pits because they love destruction. They return because the pit offers something temporary that feels useful in the moment. All right. So, this leads us to examine the difference between comfort and deliverance. See, comfort is not always safety, all right? A person can become comfortable in a harmful pattern simply because they have lived with it long enough, all right? A person can become comfortable with anger because anger gives them a feeling of control. Bitterness gives them a feeling of protection. Lust offers a temporary escape, or fear gives predictability. Uh, and they feel comfortable with dysfunction because dysfunction is what they know. All right. So this is why familiar pits are so dangerous, because they do not always feel like danger in the beginning. All right. Sometimes they feel like home. All right. Just because something feels like home does not mean it is where God wants us to live. All right. See, a familiar pit can become a false refuge. And a refuge is supposed to be a place of safety, right? But a familiar pit only pretends to be safe. Um, it may provide temporary cover, but it does not provide true healing. Okay, you see, some people hide in anger. Some people hide in silence, hide in busyness, hide in entertainment, hide in substances, hide in relationships, hide in religion without surrender, hide in isolation. You see, these places feel protective for a moment, but they do not produce freedom. Huh? A false refuge gives relief without restoration. It gives escape without healing. It gives familiarity without transformation. See, understand what we're identifying here. And this is the theme throughout the lessons, identification. So right now, we're identifying false comfort. Why does it matter? It's because what we may call comfort may actually be captivity. Hmm. Wow. Elder, what's going on with that? See, what I want you to understand, we identify that because we see what it leads to next. Okay, it leads to the idea that sin often offers something temporary. Hmm? Sin rarely represents its or presents itself by showing the full consequence first. It usually presents itself by offering temporary relief. All right, it says, "Oh, this will make you feel better," or "This will help you forget." Or how about, "This will give you control. Um, this will satisfy you. This will protect you. This will prove something. This will calm you down. This will make the pain easier." See, that is why familiar pits can be appealing. You know, they often offer a quick answer to a deeper pain. Okay, but the problem is this: temporary relief can relieve or can become long-term bondage. Okay, it can give you that temporary relief. It can relieve for the moment, for in that space of time, but long term, it enslaves you. Okay, it becomes long-term bondage when it keeps replacing true healing. Huh? So this temporary relief is not true healing. And because you're depending on this temporary relief, you become a slave to it and you never find your true healing. So if we keep using the pit to manage pain, we never bring the pain to God for healing. All right, we're depending on the pit rather than depending on God. See, Hebrews 11:24 and 25 says, by faith, Moses, when he was come to years, refused to be called the son of Pharaoh's daughter, choosing rather to suffer affliction with the people of God than to enjoy the pleasures of sin for a season. Huh. You see, the Bible does not pretend that sin has no pleasure. Okay, it says that pleasure is seasonal. All right, that means that it's temporary. It has a moment. It has an appeal. It has a feeling attached to it, but it cannot keep its promises. Ah, hmm. Oh, oh, yes, sin cannot keep its promises. You see, sin can offer pleasure for a season, but it cannot produce peace for the soul. Huh? It can distract for a moment, but it cannot heal the wound. It can satisfy the flesh temporarily, but it cannot strengthen the spirit. See, that's why Moses had to choose. He had to decide whether temporary pleasure was worth more than eternal purpose. Every familiar pit asks a similar question. Will I choose what feels good for the moment, or will I choose what leads to life? One of the most difficult truths about familiar pits is this. Sometimes deliverance feels uncomfortable at first. If a person has lived a pattern for years, freedom may feel unfamiliar. Okay? As a matter of fact, it is unfamiliar to them. All right? Peace is going to feel strange. Or the healthy boundaries that need to be put in place are going to feel harsh. Discipline is going to feel restrictive. Accountability is going to feel intrusive. Stillness is going to feel uncomfortable, and truth is going to be painful. This is because, we've been living under this illusion all this time that when we reach the point of facing reality, these things that would be normal under reality are foreign to us. So, this is why some people resist the very freedom they prayed for. See, not because freedom is bad, but because bondage became familiar. See, when the pit becomes familiar, freedom can feel foreign. All right. Uh, so we're examining this because we got to understand why sometimes people resist change. Okay. And it matters because the person may make a mistake or may mistake the discomfort of growth for the absence of God. Okay, and that's not the case. See, it leads us to understand that God's deliverance often requires us to leave familiar places. Okay, leaving the pit means leaving the pattern. Many people want deliverance from consequences, but they do not want separation from the pattern that produced them. See, they want freedom from guilt, but not freedom from the habit. They want freedom from pain, but not freedom from the source. Or they want freedom from shame, but not freedom from secrecy, or freedom from anxiety, but not freedom from control. You see, freedom from bitterness, but not freedom from resentment. All right. But we have to understand this, that true deliverance does not uh, pull us out of a pit. It teaches us how to stop living by the pattern that left us there or that led us there. Okay. That is why familiar comfort must be confronted. Okay. Because if we only leave the pit physically, but keep the same emotional, spiritual, and mental patterns, we may eventually return. See, Proverbs 26:11 drops it like this: as a dog returneth to his vomit, so a fool returneth to his folly. This is strong language, huh? You see, because it's not comfortable language, but it's truthful language. The proverb shows the tragedy of returning to what should have been left behind. Huh? The issue is not simply that the person fell, the issue is that they returned. They went back to what had already made them sick. They returned to what had already produced damage. They revisited what had already proven destructive. That is what familiar pits can do. They can make old bondage look inviting again. They can make former misery feel strangely attractive. They can make what God delivered us from appear worth revisiting. That is why wisdom must speak louder than familiarity. See, we have to ask this, why do people return to what hurt them? And sometimes and we have to take an objective look at this and say, well, sometimes it's because it's familiar, or it offers temporary relief, or it provides a sense of control, or they do not know how to live differently yet. Okay, or the new road feels uncertain to them. Or how about healing requires honesty, or freedom requires responsibility, or how about this? The pit has become part of their identity. Hmm? So, this is why we must teach with compassion as well as truth. People do not always return because they are careless. Sometimes they return because they're wounded. Sometimes they return because they are afraid. And sometimes they return because the familiar lie feels easier than the unfamiliar truth. Hmm? But even when we understand the reason, we must not excuse the return. Understanding explains the battle. It does not justify staying bound. Okay? See, comfort can become a chain. This is one of the great deceptions of familiar spirits. The thing that once felt like relief can become bondage. All right. At first, the person goes to the pit. Later, the pit seems to pull them. At first, the person chooses the pattern. Later, the pattern begins to feel automatic. At first, the person tells themselves they are in control. Later, they realize the thing they managed has begun to manage them. Hmm. So that's why the comfort of the pit must be questioned, right? So we must ask, is this comfort leading me closer to God? Is this comfort making me more whole? Is this comfort producing fruit? Is this comfort strengthening obedience? Is this comfort helping me heal? Or is it simply helping me avoid what God wants me to confront? Hmm? See, what we're doing here is we're testing comfort, in case you hadn't recognized it. And it matters because not all comfort comes from God. See, and so what this does is it leads us to the difference between false comfort and true peace. See, false comfort helps me avoid truth. True peace helps me face truth with God. False comfort numbs pain. True peace brings healing. All right. False comfort hides the wound. True peace brings the wound into the light. False comfort says, stay where it feels familiar. True peace says, follow God even when the next step feels unfamiliar. False comfort protects the pit. True peace leads me out of the pit. All right. So this is why the comfort of the familiar is not the same as the peace of God. All right. The peace of God does not always mean everything feels easy. Sometimes the peace of God is present while we're doing the hard thing. Sometimes it's the peace comes while we are confessing. Sometimes the peace comes while we are setting boundaries. Sometimes the peace comes while we are walking away. And sometimes the peace comes while we are learning a new pattern. Peace is not always the absence of discomfort, all right? Sometimes peace is the presence of God in the middle of transformation. See, Paul said in Galatians 5 and 1, stand fast, therefore, in the liberty wherewith Christ has made us free, and be not entangled again with the yoke of bondage. See, now the phrase entangled again is powerful. See, it shows us that returning is possible. A person can be made free and still be tempted to become entangled again. All right. So that is why Paul says, stand fast. All right. Freedom must be guarded, liberty must be protected, deliverance must be maintained with wisdom, obedience, and dependence on God. See, the pit may still call, the road may still appear, the familiar may still feel comfortable, but the command is clear: do not be entangled again. All right. See, this is not about living afraid. It's not about living in fear. Okay. It's about living awake. Hmm. So, in this day and time, you have people like, oh, you part of that woke mob. Yeah, yeah. You call yourself a Christian, but you don't. You want to, okay. But we're not getting into politics. Okay. Let's stay away from that for right now. All right. But yes, it's about living awake. And it's about recognizing that old patterns do not always disappear simply because we have grown. Okay. Sometimes they must be actively resisted. It is enough to leave a pit, or basically, it's enough to get out of the pit, but it's not enough for you to survive. Okay. So the familiar must be replaced. If anger was familiar, we must learn patience. If bitterness was familiar, we must learn forgiveness. If fear was familiar, we must learn trust. If isolation was familiar, we must learn godly connection. If lust was familiar, we must learn purity. If pride was familiar, we must learn humility. If control was familiar, then we must learn surrender. If shame was familiar, we must learn grace. See, a person cannot simply remove a pattern and leave the space empty. Hmm? An old familiar must be replaced with a new obedience. Can I say that again? The old familiar must be replaced with a new obedience. This is where discipleship becomes practical. You see, God does not merely call us away from something, He calls us into something. Away from bondage, into liberty. Away from darkness, into light. Away from the familiar pit, into a new walk. You see, some people must learn how to be comfortable with freedom. Huh? Okay, so that may sound a little bit strange, but this is true. See, if someone has lived under shame for years, grace feels unfamiliar. Huh? If someone's lived in chaos for years, peace feels uncomfortable. Uh, if you lived in secrecy for years, honesty may feel frightening. See, if you live by fear for years, faith feels risky. And if someone has lived by control for years, surrender becomes dangerous, feels dangerous. You get what I'm saying here? You seeing the comparables here? So when we make that statement that some people have to learn to be comfortable with freedom, if all that you've known has been shame, chaos, secrecy, fear, and control, then hey, freedom to be the opposite is a problem. Hmm? But unfamiliar does not mean unsafe. Sometimes unfamiliar means new. Sometimes unfamiliar means healthy. Sometimes unfamiliar means God is leading us beyond the limits of what we have always known. The pit feels comfortable because it's familiar. But freedom becomes familiar as we continue walking in it. Okay. It don't just fall on you. All right. The moment we practice obedience, the more obedience becomes part of our new pattern. So this week, I want you to ask yourself this: what familiar pit has felt comfortable to me? What temporary relief has it offered? What pain has it helped me avoid? What responsibility has it allowed me to delay? What truth has it helped me ignore? What comfort have I mistaken for peace? What new pattern is God calling me to practice? Okay. See, these questions are not meant to condemn you. I want you to understand that. Okay. Uh, but they're meant to reveal. Okay. Because once we understand what the pit has been offering us, we can begin bringing the real need to God. Okay. If the pit offered relief, bring the pain to God. If the pit offered control, bring the fear to God. If the pit offered escape, bring the burden to God. If the pit offered identity, bring the insecurity to God. You see, the pit may offer something temporary, but God offers something true and everlasting. So we're getting close to wrapping this thing up. But I want to let's highlight some things that we learned today. See, today we learned that the comfort of the familiar is not the same as the peace of God. Right? We learned that familiar pits may feel comfortable because they are known. We learned that sin can offer temporary pleasure and temporary escape and temporary relief. We've learned that freedom may feel uncomfortable at first, but because bondage became familiar. Okay. Freedom felt uncomfortable for us, but that's because we only understood bondage. Okay, we learned from Proverbs that returning to folly is tragic because it means going back to what we should have left behind. Okay, uh, we learned from Galatians that we must stand fast in liberty and refuse to be entangled again. All right, and we learned that the familiar must be replaced with new obedience. All right, so the question is not only what pit keeps calling me back, and it is not only what road keeps taking me there, but now the question is what has made that pit feel comfortable? You see how we're building each week, huh? So this week's challenge to help build and prepare you for next week is this. Um, don't only identify the pit, okay? Do not only map the road. Ask what comfort the pit has been offering. Ask what temporary relief has been promised. Ask what pain it has helped you avoid. Ask what responsibility it has delayed. Ask what truth it has kept you from facing. Then you bring that need to God. We covered that already. So, because the pit is often a counterfeit answer to a real issue, uh, the answer is not to pretend the need does not exist. The answer is not, basically, is to bring the need to the right place, that right place, which is God. The pit may offer relief, uh, but God offers healing. All right. The pit may offer escape, but God offers deliverance. The pit may offer familiarity, but God offers freedom. And the comfort of the familiar is not the same as the peace of God. Do not let familiarity convince you that bondage is home. Do not let temporary relief convince you that the pit is safe. Do not let old patterns convince you that freedom is impossible. See, the pit may feel familiar, but it is not your dwelling place. All right, the pattern may be old, but it's not your master. All right, the struggle may have history, but it does not have authority. See, Christ has made us free. So what we're going to do is we're going to stand in that liberty that Christ has given us. We're going to learn the difference between false comfort and true peace. We're going to ask God to teach us how to live beyond what has been familiar to us, because what feels familiar is not always what is faithful. Hmm? And what feels uncomfortable at first may be the very place where God is teaching you how to walk free. All right. So, as we close this, let our prayer be similar. Lord, help me recognize the difference between false comfort and true peace. Show me where I have become comfortable with patterns you are calling me to leave. Reveal the temporary relief I have mistaken for healing. Reveal the familiar places that have kept me from walking fully in freedom. Give me courage to leave what is familiar when it is not faithful. Give me strength to stand fast in the liberty you have given me. Teach me new patterns. Teach me obedience. Teach me surrender. Teach me how to be comfortable with freedom, and lead me away from every familiar pit that has tried to become home. In Jesus' name, amen. So we thank you for this time. This is the end of this lesson. I thank you for this opportunity to come before you. Stay tuned for the next lesson, which is going to be lesson number 4. We're almost at that place where, hey, we're going to be halfway through. But I hope that that you're really gaining something from this, something that you can walk with, something you can apply in your daily life with, and that you can say to your friends and your family and your coworker, hey, go check out this book, man, Familiar Pitfalls. It's helping me understand the things that I've fallen victim to for so many years in my life, how to understand them and how to get past them, how to be victorious over them. And it doesn't condemn me for struggling. It doesn't condemn me for falling. It's saying, hey, you know what? We understand. All right. So listen, until next time, God bless you. God keep you. And as I always tell my students, keep studying. All right. God bless you.